Oh, we have a quorum at least, so that's good. Not showing a mic for Todd.
Do we have, okay, so we got Mark and Todd and I. So we're Andy and Randy, huh?
Right.
What time are we? 5:06?
That's showing right at 5 right now. So can Todd, is your mic working?
I don't see him on there anymore.
Oh,
Is he off? I'm showing he's trying to connect.
Yeah, he's there. It looks like he's just connecting.
there we go. Made it, Todd.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good.
Get that glare off my bald head.
Should we get started then?
It looks like everybody's there. I'm assuming Joyce Meyer is Randy.
Yep.
It's going to throw me off all meeting long. All right, well, then let's go ahead and get started. We've got everybody here. Thanks for being in attendance this month for our Power Board meeting. I guess we've got everybody's all our normals, so we don't need any introductions. So let's go ahead and look. Has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda? Any comments, questions on it? No? Then I just need a motion to approve and a second to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay, so Mark did the first and Randy did the second. Todd, go ahead and start our vote.
Spriggs, aye.
Andy,
Palmer, aye.
Mark,
Hauser, aye.
and Randy,
Meyer, aye.
and Dinsmore, aye. So, okay, that's the agenda and minutes. Did everyone get a chance to look at minutes on that?
Looks good.
Again, any questions, comments, concerns?
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll go ahead and second that motion.
Okay, Todd was the first and Andy was the second. So Mark, go ahead and start us off there.
Hauser, aye.
Randy,
Meyer, aye.
Todd,
Spriggs, aye.
Andy,
Palmer, aye.
and Dinsmore, aye. So, all right, new business. Rick, it looks like you're all three motions there, things there.
Yeah, and this is these three are the three items that were presented at last month. So, and we didn't get any comments or questions, so I assume we're in pretty good shape there. However, I'm going to share my screen and we'll just go over those. And all three of these would be recommendations from the Power Board to the council to move forward with approval. Let me see if I can get this. See that one? Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
And so this is basically the same slide deck that was presented last month. Since we didn't have questions, I didn't have UFS jump on with us. So unless there's too tough of questions, hopefully I'll be able to answer any you may have. The one thing that I did notice last month when I was going back through their slides was, so on the impact fee for residential, this is the same, that we're recommending a 13% increase, which works out, I think it's $300 and some for a 200 ampere. On the commercial, on his slide deck, he actually showed a 4% increase. In reality, the study recommended a 4% decrease. So that was a omission on that. So this is the correct numbers for the commercial. And again, that's the apartments, which are residential, and the larger commercial, the same at the -4. So that's the only difference, again, in a positive light for the developers, that those will actually go down just a little bit. And so the first one on the agenda there was to approve the impact fee facilities plan. So this one, which is basically a subset of the larger capital facilities plan that was approved back in February. And so this is the table that UFS used and the dollars to develop the impact fee. So that's the first one. So I don't know if there's any questions on that, if you want to do the motion on that, and then we can do the impact fee and then the rate study after.
Is there any question on the impact fee facilities plan? Where he was saying that that was positive and now it's going negative, is that gonna?
Obviously the commercial impact fee revenue would go down a little bit. I don't think it's significant. And we'll see, well, if I can jump to that, did I get this one? For the impact fee, this is the comparison table of where we are currently here in column A, where we're proposed, and then this is comparing it to St. George, Santa Clara, Hurricane, Dixie. You'll see by doing that slight reduction in the commercial, it actually brings us a little closer in line with the other commercial impact fees in the area. The residential, we're still significantly lower, with the exception of Hurricane. Down here at the bottom, that note 3, they elected to only recover 75% of what their study showed. And so if you added at 100% level, it would be pretty close to ours. I think just slightly less than the current proposed fees. So I think we're in really good shape as far as being competitive, and that's the results, based. It's hard to put a whole lot of stock in this other than being aware of where we are in comparison to the other utilities. The study that they prepared here for the impact fees, it's based on our inputs, our data, our loads, our costs. And so I think you kind of need to go where the study directs us on those.
So what's the purpose of going down on the commercial? Have we had concerns or complaints? Are we doing it for just enticing new business?
No,
Because it seems like we have plenty of development in commercial.
correct. No, and it, again, is the numbers, based on the assumptions we put into the study with the cost of service, that's where the study shows that we should be. Based on our next 5 to 10 year plan, and what our current costs are and those projections, that's what the study shows they should be. So it's not necessarily to drum up additional commercial business or anything. It's just a function of the output of all the inputs that we've reviewed and went through in their process. Is a little bit different than previously used for the impact fee. And so it's not totally surprising that it would come out just slightly different on that. So does that answer your question? Again, it wasn't motivated, we didn't try to write the answer and fit the study to the answer. That was how the study panned out based on the assumptions we put in.
Hey, Rick, when you do that comparison between us and St. George and stuff, is St. George and Dixie just so much higher because it's all new infrastructure that they've got to put in place? I mean, that's significant for us to be that low, isn't it?
Yes. To be quite honest, I haven't looked at the St. George study. I don't know what they've put in. We're pretty conservative as far as the projects we put in. I know other utilities are more aggressive, and they may even throw generation in there, which I think gets pretty potentially dicey, just because those resources get mixed with new and existing customers. It's not as easy to just carve out the new that's using those. So again, short of reviewing all their details, I'm not sure exactly what they put in there. And the same with Dixie as well. A lot depends on how aggressive you are on improvements. Like if we upgrade a line from a smaller conductor to a larger conductor, I go in and see what the capacity difference is. And that's how the impact fee law is written. You can charge for the increase in capacity, but not the total cost if it's an upgrade. And so we've been pretty meticulous in that. Of course, a brand new substation like the Substation 8, it's 100% impact fee qualified. So the other thing I think plays into this just a little bit is the city back in the mid 2000s when they built Sienna Hills and Coral Canyon and did a lot of the major transmission infrastructure. We ended up with, at the time the growth was supposed to be booming like it is now. A couple of years later, the growth dropped off. And so there was a lot of excess capacity in that system that we're just now growing into. And so some of those costs of those facilities obviously are older and cheaper than they would be for new facilities at this point, if that makes sense. So we had capacity built into the system that wasn't ever recovered because of how the market played out. So if all those, like say the Sienna Hills, there by the Washington Parkway and Telegraph, that area between Telegraph and the freeway, historically, that substation, when I first started 4 years ago, was, I believe, our lowest loaded substation, and now it's our highest or second highest based on all the growth. So that capacity that was there finally got used, and obviously at a cheaper rate than what the new, if it was brand new. Does that help?
Yeah.
And as far as the increase, I know Jeremy was going to try to meet with Suba to just go over it with them so they were aware. But the last study was done in 2013, so It's a 8-year gap between those. So I don't think the 13% is unrealistic. If you were looking at just pure inflation, it'd probably even be higher than that. So
I guess that's where I'm struggling with the 4% decrease. We're 4% less than 2013. And that,
in the
I'm
methodology,
having a hard time wrapping my head around why. I don't understand how it can go down from 2013 to present when we've had so much growth. What am I missing? Maybe you need to explain it like you're talking to a 4-year-old, because
no,
I'm missing something.
I have the same basic concern, and I think a lot of it is the methodology that UFS used is a little different than what ICPE did previously. And so that methodology and how they applied it, I think UFS's is a more detailed analysis than what was done previously to try to account for the actual cost of service for each rate class. That's my best explanation. Like I say, it's kind of apples and oranges methodologies. The previous one was a simpler one. This one is more elaborate. They've got a lot more detail in their cost of service study than what was done previously.
Isn't it cheaper to service more customers than a smaller base?
Well, a commercial customer generally is easier to serve because they're generally a higher load factor and utilize the system a little more efficiently than the residential. And I think that's partly what we're seeing accounted for here is the differences between, and again, that goes back into their more detailed study where they go into pretty good detail of each rate class and what it costs to serve each one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, let me. I was just looking here, trying to think of an example like I believe like the most recent motel, the Best Western, if I remember right, it was either a 12 or a 1600 amp 208. So I mean, they're in the $40,000 to $50,000 range for their impact fee. Again, you see that 4%. Yes, it is a drop, but it's not dramatic. And again, I think it better reflects actual costs to serve those type of customers. So
you think we were high back in 2013?
Again, there's so many variables that are different. This study would, if they were perfectly the same methodology with the same inflation, I think you would see across the board changes. I think the difference with residential going up and commercial going down is a sign of just the different methodologies used between the two studies. And UFS is the one that's done our rate studies for the last 2 times. Again, I think they're more, it's a more detailed approach than what was previously done. Not saying the other one was bad or wrong. It's just, again, within that percentage margins, you could make these studies do a lot of different things in those small percentage ranges, just based on some simple assumption changes.
I mean, if we're having I guess the concern is instead of dropping at 4%, we just leave it as it is. Can we do that too?
I think if we're gonna adopt and say this is our study, I think you can adopt a level less than what is shown in the study, but I don't think you could adopt a level that says more than the study. Does that make
Okay.
sense? I think
Yeah.
we could get crossways with if somebody challenged it. But like in Hurricane's case, say it was $2,000, they elected to only charge $1,500. You can be less than, but you can't be more than, would be my recommendation or thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, it semi makes sense because you think about all the commercial areas and infrastructure is to most of those areas. And that's what this impact fee is mostly to, is to provide the infrastructure. So I could see how, I mean, like in 2013, the stuff around Sienna Hills and Exit 13 wasn't there. But now that all that infrastructure is there, even though the businesses still have to go in, the cost we've already paid for that infrastructure.
Right, right. And they're generally going to be clustered or more concentrated. So I think you could make a pretty easy case. It's a little cheaper to, compared to residential to serve that type of area. So there's not any one simple, easy factor that, you can pin down to make that difference. It's a combination of a lot of assumptions. If we made tweaks to some of the assumptions, it could change these very easily. But I don't think it's going to be huge amounts. Again, even some of these bigger service sizes in the overall scheme of things are pretty small. And I don't have a large concern with doing that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Good, thank
Well,
you.
it's your salary that's affected, not ours. So, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I
Any
think-
other questions or comments?
Nope.
Well, let's split it up and let's just say, can we have a recommendation, a second for the approval of the impact fee facilities plan?
I move to approve the facilities plan.
I'll go
I'll
ahead and
second.
second. Oh,
What we're doing is we're recommending to the city council the approval of the facilities plan. We're not approving it.
Right.
They have to approve it.
Right.
So
I move that if I were,
Randy, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna create a joke. It wasn't even that funny, so forget it.
Randy did the first, Todd did the second. Andy, do you want to start a vote?
Yeah, Palmer, aye.
Mark,
Hauser, aye.
Randy,
Meyer, aye.
Todd,
Spriggs, aye.
and Dinsmore, aye. Okay, the impact fee study, Rick.
And that kind of really ties into what we've just been talking about. I mean, that the 4% resides more in the impact fee study, the 4% decrease and the 13% increase in the impact fee study as opposed to the facilities plan. So unless there's more questions on the impact fee study, that's the basic result is commercial goes down 4% and residential up 13 for the reasons we just had talked about there.
Okay, any
Politically, I
questions?
wish it was the other way around, but
Yeah, I guess that's true. Again, in I come back to, you know, this, you look at our commercial, you know, 66, you compare, that puts us right in line with everybody but St. George on the commercial size, and residential, we're, even with the increase, we're still one of the lower ones in the county.
Okay. That's not a huge impact.
No, I think it's $349
They're down.
for a typical 200 amp house. $324.
Is it exactly double the price for 400 amps versus 200?
Yep. Yeah, it's all proportional. So for a given voltage service, be it single phase or a 120, 208, 3-phase, if you double it, it'll double. If it's, and that's actually even something that might point out, it's a little bit more work, but I think it's worth it. A lot of the other utilities, their minimum one they'll charge is like their 200 amp. They don't even offer the 100, 125, and 150. So they basically round up to 2 or 3 steps. Again, it's not that big a deal to develop a chart, in my opinion, to make it match what they're actually installing on their home or business. So.
And Rick, this is Andy. I just had a question as well. So I know a typical home, whether it's 200 amps. So if somebody needed an additional more than that, would we typically install an additional 200 or 150? If they need more than that, where they jump up to a 400? What does that typically look like?
So say if somebody had 150 amp on their home right now and needed to go to a 225, they would arrange with a contractor to physically make that change, but their impact fee that they would pay at that time would be just the difference between the two, because they've already paid for the 150 at that point. So it would be the difference between the 3120 and the 2080 cost. So it's just a delta. And we have that happen, not super frequently, but it happens occasionally. I mean, actually Walmart, our biggest customer, they're looking at upgrading their service. And so their impact fee would be based on the difference between what they put in and what they currently have.
Okay.
And then if there were any system improvements that would have to go along with that, if we had to put in another bigger transformer or something like that, which on residential generally isn't the case, then they would be charged for that difference as well. But usually on a small increase, not very often does that happen.
Why are 3-phase apartments more than 1-phase?
Because in a 3-phase panel, you have more capacity. So the actual rate, if you will, dollar per kVA is the same, but you can serve a 100 amp 120 3-phase or 120 208 3-phase can serve more than a 100 amp 240. Basically, there's 3 hot legs instead of 2.
Okay.
It's not an exact 2/3 because of some of the formulas involved, but it has more capacity. So if you broke it down on a cost per kVA, it's the same. And so it's higher just because it can serve more.
I see.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we're looking for a motion then on that recommendation of the approval of the impact fee study to the city council.
I'll go ahead and motion to recommend the impact fee study to the city council.
I'll second.
Okay, Andy did the first and Mark did the second. So Todd, do you want to start us?
Spriggs, aye.
Randy,
Meyer, aye.
Andy,
Palmer, aye.
Mark,
Hauser, aye.
and Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Rick, the recommendation of the rate study.
This one's a little, I think, more straightforward because, again, this is the same presentation that you had before, and he looked at the various metrics of, the debt coverage ratio, the target operating income, minimum cash, and overall, they looked at it. Again, they did a detailed cost of service study where we give them information on even down to what it costs to install a typical pole or pad mount transformer, those kind of things. And their recommendation is no rate change at this time. Kind of stay the course. The PCA, we talked about that last month. And that helps buffer as far as wholesale power cost increases or changes. So with that, and that was, I think Mike probably was the only one around or on the board when that was implemented. And I think that was a great feature, structure, whatever you want to call it, that was implemented at that time. And I think we're reaping some of the benefits of that. Otherwise, we'd have to have these studies, I think, more frequently and have rate changes much more often, because that does automatically adjust with our wholesale cost based on that 12-month average that Mark talked about last time.
What year was that done?
It
The
was
increase?
2017, and then then there was built in at that time they increased the rates in 2017, and then there were also built-in rate increases for the next 2 years, gradual ones, one in 2018 and one in 2019. And then since then, we haven't changed since 2019. The only change would be is the PCA using this formula does that adjustment once a month, and it can go positive or negative. Generally, it's been positive. We have had a couple months, a little over a year ago, that it did go negative. Not a lot, but a little bit.
How often do they suggest we do these studies?
We've been doing them. Well, when I talked to them, they wanted basically a couple years after your last rate increase. So probably not this next budget year, but the one following. Particularly with the wholesale power market being as volatile as it is, we may want to bunch that up a little quicker. And certainly if we see something we're not comfortable with, they could jump in and do a quicker evaluation if we wanted to do it more frequently. But generally every couple of years, I think it's good to look at it. And that's the reason why we commissioned this study, if you will, is to make sure we're still on track, and that there weren't any problems that they were seeing from a financial. And they have and the one nice thing of using UFS again is they have a longer historical background. And so as we do these subsequent studies, they have a bigger trend to work from. But again, as Mark from UFS indicated last month, that he didn't see anything alarming of where we're at. versus, where we should be, and we should be all right for the next, until we do the next study.
Yeah, it sounded like we were in a better position than a lot of cities as far as being conservative and fiscal. Sounds like we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, and again, I have to, give credit to the Power Board and Kelly before me. The implemented, I think it took, Mike can attest that I don't think that was a easy process to go through and do those rate changes, but I think it's really paid off and put the department in a lot better fiscal position than it had been previously. So, hats off for them to take that step. And I think we're starting to see those benefits and dividends of that foresight.
It's a long process. I think seems like it probably took us about a year to get through all of that.
Right. And this PCA was one of the key features that was introduced at that time. And again, I think it's protects the department and the city and the ratepayers overall. And so this one's I guess would be an approval of the update to the study, even though there's really no change to the current rates that are proposed at this time. It's more of a acknowledgement or affirmation or whatever that we're on the right track.
So where there's no change, do we need to?
Well, I think it would be good at a minimum to say, the Power Board's looked at it, and we're going to be presenting this to the council a week from tomorrow. That you didn't see any big concerns either. So that's why I put it that way, or approval or acceptance of the rate study, the current rate study. And that would at least get us up to the last study that we're at.
You're doing that next Wednesday?
Yeah, on the 13th. It'll be part of the work session at 4:30, and then on the impact fee, we have to do a public hearing in the main meeting, and then they'll do the approvals of that after.
What time's that meeting at?
The work session's at 4:30, and then the main meeting starts at 6. And I haven't seen the agenda yet. I believe the work session, we're the majority of it. The fire department has their impact fee on the agenda as well. As far as the work session, and then I haven't seen the main meeting. I'm guessing it's typically probably going to be towards the end. And I know they said there's, I think, 3 or 4 other public hearings on developments, and those usually, not always, but can take up some time. So if the meeting starts at 6, I can't tell you exactly when the approvals would go. But the main discussion should be in the work session. So yes, that would be, if you're able to attend physically or remotely, that would be great.
All right. Any other questions or comments on the rate study?
I'll move to recommend the rate study to the city council.
I'll second.
So Randy did the first and Mark did the second. Andy, do you want to start the vote?
Yes, Palmer, aye.
Todd,
Briggs, aye.
Randy,
Aye.
Mark,
Hauser, aye.
and Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And on to the regular business operations report and generations update.
Okay, I'm just gonna leave my shared screen up there right now because I have some more when we get to the UAMPS. But as far as our general department operations, things have been going well. One of our main areas, obviously, again, in that same area, is growth and the new large Green Springs development north of the Parkway. We had a joint meeting a couple of weeks ago with the Planning Commission, City Council, and city staff to go over the PCD, Planned Community Development documents. So we're working with them through that. I believe they were on the Planning Commission agenda for tomorrow night. I don't know if that's still on or not, but that's the last I heard. Kind of in conjunction with that development and the hospital and other improvements by Exit 13, we have been working with Sitla, the developers, the Tortoise Habitat, the HCAC, on getting a substation site in that area to serve the new load. Right now, it looks like things go as we hope. That site could be done in conjunction with a new trailhead site there for the Grapevine Trail. But again, there's lots of different boards through the reserve that have to approve things. And so we're working through that in conjunction with the developers and Sitla itself. So right now it's moving forward slowly, but surely, which is right now I'm hopeful that it will continue to move forward with that. Our September peak was just a little over 41 megawatts. Wholesale pricing for September, and it's even carried over into October a little bit, as during peak times has stayed relatively high in the $70 to $100 a megawatt hour. But it is starting to moderate, which is a good thing. But even today, it was over 100 for those peak hours. Fortunately, we don't need to buy much right now because our loads are about just under half of what they are during the peak time. So our loads drop off dramatically, especially when we have a rainstorm come through that did around 4 o'clock or so. You can actually just see that on the loads that it dropped about 10% when that came through. The overall wholesale prices for August were a little better than, which is the most recent month I have from UAMPS, was a little better than June and July. June and July were in the low 90s overall average per megawatt hour, and August was in the upper 80s. So a little progress. We're hoping that that'll drop more in line with historical come September and October. Generation, we actually did run 7 days in September, which is a little unusual, but prices stayed up there that first week and a half, higher than expected. So we actually ran the generators 7 days in September. Not real long runs, about 5 to 6 hours on the days we did run. And we'll continue to keep an eye on that. Right now, when I get into the UAMPS report, the Nebo plant is down for maintenance. So there's a chance that we could be more exposed than normal with that plant down, but UAMPS is doing a good job of replacing that power for us. So as far as the crews, they've been, and it'll be the kind of the common theme for most of this year, this budget year. We have a lot of smaller projects, tidying up maintenance issues, pole change outs that are getting old, rusted equipment, those kind of things that they've been focused on. We did replace 2 sections of old direct buried cable with some new in conduit cable up on, excuse me, Bullock Circle and the 700 East area. Again, that was an area that the crews have been concerned about it since I've been here, that if we had a problem, it would be pretty lengthy to try to restore that in an outage situation. So it was a proactive replacement of those sections of cable. In fact, really close to Mike's house.
Really close.
But that'll be good. And it's those kind of projects, you know, there's different areas, you know, that are, I guess if you want to say, more prone to an outage or older part of the system that we've been trying to, you know, get some of those replaced before we have it's a lot better to do it proactively than in an outage situation. We do have the materials on order for a line rebuild on Cactus Lane from Buena Vista up to Green Springs Drive. When the poles are here, when the rest of the materials come, you'll start seeing the crews up there replacing that double circuit line. It's a key line. It's again one that's a little bit older, and we want to get ahead of that because if it had a problem, you know, it has a lot more effect than where if we can do it ahead of time, if we do our job right, there'll be little, if any, impact to the customers. On the renewable resource applications, I was just going to note for the solar installations, we had 10 in September, which was the second highest we've had in a single month. So that continues to be a strong program. I would anticipate these last 3 months of the year, it'll be at a fairly rapid rate as people try to get it in so they can qualify it for various tax credits. So, and I think I mentioned last month that the new resource guide is on the city website that gives people some background information and questions they should consider.
I did notice there was a negative comment on the Washington City Matters post this morning about the city not paying back more for the credits. I don't know if anyone else saw that, but there were a couple of comments went back and forth on that.
Okay. Do you think on that particular site, to be quite honest, we try to stay out as best as we can because it can be pretty toxic at times. So
who is doing that site? I just joined.
It's not a city site. I don't know if Dave's on, if he could comment on that. I think you deal.
Yeah. It's not a city site. It's ran by Sherry Staley and I believe Sarah Lang. And so we do not monitor or to pay attention to it. We have our own Washington State discussion group that we do monitor though.
Okay.
And that's probably the best thing to do is if we can direct people to get the correct information, or I think a lot of times it's just they don't understand why things are the way they are. And they could be directed to the correct city site. And I don't know what is that exactly, Dave. I don't do Facebook at all, personally or professionally. So
Right. Well, Facebook has some weird.
That's why you're
things.
happier than the rest of us.
The best way to find it would just be go to washingtonstate.org/news and there'll be a link on there to find it.
yeah, and typically if something arises, our IT group monitors some of that, and if there's questions on the city one that we need to respond to, they'll work with us and we'll get the correct information there. So the Parks Department's gonna be building a new building up in their yard. And so as part of that, to make way for that improvement, the crews have spent a fair amount of time cleaning up our part of the yard we've used up there for a pole laydown area. And we've repositioned poles. We've still got a little bit more to do, but basically the goal is to clear the area for the new improvement up there. Our department did our annual CPR training with the fire department. That's always very important to have, and one of those things you hope you never have to use. But I don't know if anybody's been around a situation where that's come up, but it's pretty important to have everybody up to speed on that. Fleet Equipment Services does our annual truck inspections. So they came in, I think it was week before last, and did inspections on our line trucks and bucket trucks that's required to be done annually. All but one of the trucks fared pretty well. We've got some minor things to do. One of them, we have some issues with the hoses, and so we're evaluating the best way to proceed with that. It'll be fairly costly to replace the hoses on that truck. So we're looking at some options and getting pricing on repairing versus looking at maybe a new truck or those kind of things. So we did some more load balancing in the Coral Canyon area to better balance the load between the two circuits that serve that area. And we have one more area kind of up in the Bluffview area that we'll do some balancing hopefully this next month. And then I think based on the information we had last summer, that'll get us in a real good spot going forward for next year. They've energized a couple new subdivisions in the Brio and Views areas. One thing that will be coming up that you may be getting questions or comments on is Wayne's working on our annual tree trimming list, and that'll probably start somewhere around Thanksgiving, depending on the schedule with B.A. Robinson. And we'll try to put out on the Facebook and maybe in the, the newsletter, just to give people warning that that'll be coming. And then as the trimming occurs, the contractor will get with them individually and let them know what's going to happen. So, but that's something we try to do late in the year. Hopefully after most of the leaves are off, it makes it easier for them. We've been working with the Solus development, which is up on the Highlands area, up by the water tank, between the Highlands Park and the water tank. And that's another fairly large subdivision that'll be coming in on getting some ties down to the Sienna Hill side, as well as the main Coral Canyon side, which is going to help our system provide backup in both directions in that area. Jake does his monthly sub checks. So far, he hasn't found any significant issues, which is a good thing. And he'll be starting on working on getting the new RTUs in a couple of the substations. Since we were able this time of year, we can shift load around and take a substation out of service while we do testing and maintenance on those. So wintertime or fall and winter and early spring is the time to try to get ready for the next summer. Any questions on that? That's again generally for our operations locally. Okay. Want me to go on to the UAMP side?
Go ahead and go on to UAMPS.
Okay. One of our October UAMPS board meeting will be the annual board retreat, and we'll be talking about the pool project. One of the things that's happened this last summer, historically, there's kind of two markets, if you will, where they'll buy power. They call it the day ahead market, and they try to cover the majority of the load, secure resources. And then they'll leave some for the real time, or basically almost on an hourly basis. Historically, the pricing for the day ahead has been less than the real time. This last year, due to some requirements in California, it's kind of flipped that around and created some challenges. That the real time or the day ahead pricing has actually been higher than the real time pricing. So it makes it difficult to schedule in the most economic way, because you don't know. So people will hold on to the resource, and then they find out they don't need it, and then they'll dump them back. And so that'll be one of the topics at this retreat, which kind of dovetails into, there's a lot of movement in the industry of resource adequacy, meaning you have to have enough resources to cover your load, and how far in advance, and spinning reserves and all those kind of things. So it'll be an interesting retreat that hopefully I'll have some information to report to you at the next meeting. One of the bigger things that happened last week is at the end of each summer, the area utilities, it's called the Southwest Technical Task Force, which was established by the PSC, Utah PSC 20 plus years ago. And so at the end of each summer, Rocky Mountain takes the lead. However, Deseret and UAMPS has input, and I participate in the studies and the information leading up to this. They call it the post-peak report. So I'll just go quickly through here. If there's something that interests you or you have questions about, just stop me. So the Washington County area peaked this last summer at 591.4 megawatts on July 10th, which is a Saturday, which is unusual. Usually it's on a weekday, but that was the day where we tied the all-time high temperature for the area. So it's not, and the day before, the Friday before, I think was, I have to go from memory, I think it was about a megawatt or so less than the 591. So pretty much the 9th and the 10th were almost interchangeable. A couple of the utilities peaked on the 9th and others peaked on the 10th. We were on the 10th. And this is the hourly loads from June to 1st of June through August. And this is looking at the Red Butte substation up just to the west of Central, on your way up to Enterprises, where all the transformation for the county comes from. And so that shows the 591 peak. And again, you can see the day before it was really, really close to that. And then this shows for the last 20 years what that peak number has been. And you can see these last 2 years have been substantial growth. Not a big shock for anybody that lives down here. I think two events have been happening to, from 16 to 20 or 19, it was fairly flat. And then we see these big jumps. One was the record-breaking growth for pretty much all the utility areas, as well as there's been some really hot periods in those 2 years as well. And so it kind of compounds on each other. This next graph breaks that same load out by how it's being served. The red is the amount of that load that's being served by, we're going to call it local generation, but that includes our local natural gas generation, as well as a sizable portion of solar that's north of Enterprise. There's two really big solar farms up there, but I think it's about 200 and I want to say 50 megawatts between the two. And so that's, this red is generation that comes in. So the 296, and this was at the time of that peak, is what was flowing through the transformers. The rest was being supplied by local generation. And now we're starting to see with that really large solar plant, or those two solars up north. So the gray curve that has the 591 is what our gross load, or basically the sum of all the loads of the utilities in the county. The blue curve is what flows through those transformers up at Red Butte and Central substations. And so you can see there's, the peak occurs about 6 o'clock, but the peak in the transformers occurs, it's pretty close to 9 o'clock, generally 8 to 9 o'clock. And that's being caused by load staying high, but solar dropping off, and solar is the yellow curve. And then the orange one is basically the Mill Creek generation, which are the two big units St. George has. And so this blue curve we've talked about in previous of the duck curve, and somewhere in there you can picture a duck, I guess. But that's what the solar is doing to the net load in the system. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, solar is really high, the load hasn't increased, and so flowing through those transformers was probably, looks like maybe about 40 megawatts is all. And then you can see the steep incline in the evenings where solar starts to drop off on the yellow curve, but it drops off much faster than the load drops off. So it creates this blue, I don't know if I want to call it a spike, but this quick increase in load through those transformers. And so this is what's kind of happening to, when we've talked in the past on aggregate on the overall system, to the thermal generation, where they have to, because of the large amounts of solar, sometimes they'll, you know, particularly like in California, you have to back down your thermal units because the solar's coming up. And then at this, in the evening, you have to ramp them up really fast because the solar's dropping off fast. And so when they talk about the duck curve and some of the operational issues, this graph really shows what's happening between those different resources and what it does to the net load on the system. Does that make sense or help? Make it more confusing?
So that net load would be more flat, but it would still go down during those times, even without solar, just because of less usage, right? But because of solar, it drops down fairly drastically.
Correct. Well, if solar wasn't there and you took the Mill Creek generation off, you'd end up with the gray curve. So the gray curve is what you would historically typically see, if you will. And so the orange plus yellow plus blue equals the gray curve.
So the solar does benefit. It just causes some additional issues that we have to address, but it does look like it helps, right?
Yes, to a degree. I mean, obviously it's providing the kilowatt hours that you don't have to. And again, this has nothing to do with Washington City or UAMPS. This is
Right.
This is looking at it from the Rocky Mountain perspective of what's happening at those two substations. But you can see, and so right now, you know, the 591 is what we traditionally have to plan for. And now we've got the 396 later peak. the bulk of that difference is the 80 megawatts at Mill Creek, St. George, plus our generation, Hurricanes, Santa Clara. But at 9 o'clock at night, solar's basically off. And so it kind of shifts the planning criteria, and then it does affect operationally. They did comment that it could have probably happened this time of year when the temperatures drop off and the loads drop off. This blue curve actually will go negative, and they'll export other parts of the system. So this is on the peak day. And so it does create some operational challenges, planning challenges. I'm not sure what this little blip is in the middle of the solar. If it was clouds, if it was, normally it would come up and have kind of a nice arc back down. And again, these are physically located different than where we are here. They're 70 miles north of Enterprise, kind of. So I just thought it was a good graph to kind of see operationally what some of the renewables do. And of course, if it was wind was down here, it may go up and down. It would, the one benefit of solar is I think it's more gradual, where wind can be very hot and cold and you can't count on it. So that would add another complexity in here if wind was in the area, which we don't have right now. Does that help? But anyway, like I say, I just thought it was an interesting graph to see what's going on the system.
Do you show costs for the different types of power?
Not in this study, no. Yeah, this was more of just strictly an operational study.
Okay.
Because the difference between the blue, you got to remember there's 80 megawatts of thermal or natural gas based between these two. And at that time, they dropped off, what is it, probably 70 megawatts of solar by 6 o'clock.
Is solar typically less expensive than the other, or not really?
Well, solar's, yeah, less expensive, just like our solar products coming up, we're buying them in the $30 a megawatt hour. But the challenge again with those is they have this shape, and if I need it out here at 9 o'clock, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So I have to go buy a resource to help cover the 9 o'clock that I'm only using for a very limited period of time. And so that's one of the reasons that, if you, like our generators, we only run them during the highest load periods. If you aggregate, if they could run 24/7, their cost per kilowatt hour would be much less than if we only run them 6 to 8 hours a day.
Okay.
This graph, they're just showing this 570 is kind of if we lose the biggest transformer up at Central Red Butte, that's the amount of capacity that we're left with. And so they're showing, would be between 70 to 80% of capacity. So, but that makes the assumption that this amount of generation's online. So if something happens to the Mill Creek generators, this buffer here of 100 megawatts would evaporate really quickly. As far as temperatures this last year, it was kind of interesting. The dark brown line is our average summer high temperature. And it was actually lower than the previous several years, believe it or not. But the cooling degree days, which is a measure of how hot it is, it takes into account how hot it is at night, is how I look at it. It was substantially higher. So it's kind of opposite, not quite intuitive there. And there's a couple other temperature graphs. This one isn't too surprising to you. basically we didn't have any rain this year, which can also affect, you know, the load and the humidity in the area. This graph, we keep adding to it every year. And so there's a lot of interesting trends. Again, it's used to kind of see. So this green line, and he kind of put this little halo around it, was this, the number of hours over at a given temperature is what this shows. So 2021 was less than previous years as far as the number of hours at like 100 to 101 degrees. But you get out to these hotter temperatures, there were more hours at hot temperatures. And I think that's what drove that peak on that Saturday. And this is kind of a different way to look at it too. This year again is the green with the little halo around it or shading. So we had, what was it, 4 hours at 114, just a little over 114. Where previous years we haven't had that as much, you know, roughly 9 hours at 113, 13 hours at 112, and so forth. So the extreme temperatures, we had quite a few of those, but the overall average, if you average just that daily temperature, we were actually down from previous years. So and consecutive 100+ degree days. This is again a graph that they keep adding each year on there. Again, we only had 14 consecutive of 100+ degree or 100 degree days. And last year we had 35. And then 18 we had 38. And that's the current projections. We'll be working on those for upcoming years. This is how it breaks out between Pacific Court, Deseret, which is Dixie, and Garcane out in Twin Cities, and then UAMPS is the light gray. So that kind of shows how the loads break out in the area. The two next bigger projects is by next summer, this remedial action scheme should be installed. And what that allows us to do, if we lose the one big transformer at Red Butte, it will allow us to continue to load up the remaining two to their full capacity. Because if one of those trips at that point, then the system will automatically trip down until it gets under the remaining transformer. And the next big improvement is scheduled for 2026. They'll convert one of the lines to 345 kV and install a new transformer at the St. George sub up there by the T-Bone Trail and just north of St. George. So that was their conclusion. We had, as an area, not Washington. Washington's growth was 13% over 2020, but the overall county basically was an 8% growth. And it above average nightly lows. And then we have that really high peak for those couple days. And they're comfortable that we've got enough capacity to get us until 2026. Any questions on that report? I just got it today, so I had it in my original notes to present it to you next time, but I got it today and it's more timely this month than in a couple. So, any questions, thoughts? Okay. Other project reports from UAMPS. The Payson project, it ran great this last summer. The Nebo plant there in Payson, for for most all the summer. It ran almost 24/7. And right now, last Friday, they took it offline and they're doing a control system upgrade. So it'll be offline until the first week in November. So basically all of October, it'll be off, and then they'll start doing testing early November, and it should be ready to go. I believe their target is the second week in November to be back fully functional. So the control system, it's just dated. It's the original one that was in the plant. So you can imagine electronics that are 15, 20 years old. That's ancient in electronic, timeframes. And so they're doing a complete revamp of that. I told the plant manager, it ran so well this last summer, I hate to dare fiddle with it, but it's scheduled, and we have had issues in the past, and it's becoming very difficult for them to get parts for that old system. So the Vail plant we talked about last month is still offline. We're hoping mid this month that it will get the generator back and we can get that back online. That was due to a bearing leak, and they had to send it. I believe it was a plant in Arizona is where they sent the generator for repairs for. The other big thing at UAMPS is, and I don't know if you've been following all the fun federal legislation going in or being proposed. One of the items, so there's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and then there's the that's been passed by the Senate, and then there's the second infrastructure bill that's being ping-ponged around a lot right now. But the last information we had available, at least at the UAMPS meetings, is that the Democrats this is the second plan that they would move forward under, they call it reconciliation. And so they don't need the 60 vote in the Senate like they do under normal legislation. But one of the things that they're proposing that would impact us is this clean electricity performance program. So they're calling it the CEPP. So be careful not to get that confused with the carbon free project, the CFPP. But what they're proposing is starting in 2023, which is only a little over a year out, that they would require electric utilities to increase their clean energy by 4% per year until 2030. They can't go longer than that because of the reconciliation has a limit of a 10-year time frame on it. It has provisions in there. If you meet that goal or the 4%, they will pay you $150 per megawatt hour above the 1.5% of the previous year's total. If you don't meet that target, 4% per year, you can be assessed the penalty of $40 a megawatt hour. So
What percentage are we now? Do you know?
I don't, and that's some of the things that are unclear. And one of the things that I'm working on and hope to have better information for you at our next meeting is like the heat recovery project at Vail. I don't know how they consider that, because our project is clean because we're using waste heat off of a natural gas compressor. So I don't know. So the original heat source is natural gas, but we're capturing that heat that otherwise would have, gone to waste. So it's still unclear, would that qualify or not? And so I'm working on breaking out each of our resources and what would it qualify under here? Our CRSP would qualify, our Horse Butte Wind would, and the VAO is a question mark. And then in 2022, we'll have the 2 solar projects that we'll be involved with coming online. Kind of compounding that, or in conjunction, they're making a big push, and it's fine, in electric vehicle infrastructure. But what that's going to do is shift the energy required to drive the cars from the transportation sector to the electric sector. And it's going to be a challenge to meet these goals already. Now, if we push more load on the electric sector, it's going to make it even more challenging. And this is the requirement right now. This carbon intensity can't be more than this 1/10, and I believe the units on it are ton per megawatt hour. And basically they indicated that you would have to use carbon sequestration in order to meet that goal, even on a natural gas plant. So like Nebo wouldn't qualify, our generators wouldn't qualify. And so they say it's fuel neutral, but in reality, they're making it extremely difficult to use anything but wind or solar or nuclear or hydro to meet this goal. And again, you have working with us to evaluate the impact on not only Washington, but UAMPS as a group. You got a question, Randy?
It just seems like they've got so much red tape on like the nuclear, and it takes so long to get the infrastructure built up and moving. It's just kind of, the right hand slapping the left hand.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point, because Doug Hunter, the CEO of UAMPS, wrote a letter to both the House and Senate energy committees expressing that exact concern, that, we've got a project in the works, but it's not going to come online. And so when 2030 comes and that plant's online, we're going to make a huge jump in this percentage. But up until then, we're going to be faced potentially with this. And so we're going to have to figure out ways to mitigate any of these costs. And it's hard to balance that with that larger project coming. So the resources come in lumps, where these want you to kind of think that you magically can go get 4% per year. I think we're going to find, and you've already heard rumblings that, potential solar panel shortages, just like everything else. So I'm not sure where some of this resource is going to come from. So again, it hasn't been passed yet, but by the time we meet next time, it very well could be, and we'd have more definitive. But this is what the current proposal was in the legislation. So there's a lot of figuring it out, and APPA has expressed similar concerns to Congress, their contacts. And again, I don't have any problem with working towards, but I think the piece that's missing is a practical transition from where we're at to where we want to go. Just arbitrarily throwing out percentages and things like that, could be problematic. So that's the challenge I see anyway, is that somehow it has to be tied to reality of what you physically can do. And they kind of ignore some of the operational issues that, this last summer, California suspended some of their pollution limits and allowed natural gas plants to run. because that was their only choice to keep the lights on. And so I just think you really need a plan instead of people outside of the industry dictating. I think there needs to be more discussions on how to meet these goals and to get where we need to go. Good news is on this front is the Red Mesa and that should be online for this upcoming June. I said it's still on track. The Steel Solar, the first one of those will be December of next year. And those are both on track as far as contracts, getting the contractors lined up and those kind of things. There's several projects. The Enchant project could be on as early as next year. That's the coal plant in New Mexico that they're going to do carbon capture on. Again, there's question marks of whether that will meet this type of requirement, this 1/10. I don't think it will. So that raises a question mark. Can you continue with a project that won't meet these goals? It'll make it a real challenge. So that's all part of what we've got to get figured out here shortly. So the solar project in New Mexico, the heat recovery in Wyoming, and the second Steel Solar. We haven't got a lot of updated information on that. The employee at UAMPS that was spearheading those actually passed away a couple of days ago from cancer. So the progress on those has been not as, from the business side, not as quick as it hoped, but obviously we were sad to hear about his passing. So on the federal hydro projects, the CRSP, we don't get a lot. We get about 0.5 megawatt from the dams. But they did report the Lake Powell, again, no surprise, is very low at 31% of capacity, and it's down 52 feet. And they've done some studies that if things don't change in the water as early as not next summer, but the following summer, they may have to shut the generation off at Glen Canyon, which again would have some effect on us, but not as much as some of the utilities that have a larger allocation. I thought it was interesting to know each foot that they reported each foot that the lake goes down drops the output of that hydro plant 3 megawatts. So as that goes down, because the pressure reduces as the water comes down, they can't get the full output on those. Our two wind projects, the Horse Butte and Pleasant Valley, they were around 25% capacity factor this past month. And last but not least is the Carbon Free project. And this is a quick update, and there's a lot of words here. The main thing here is the revolving line of credit with Bank of America was approved and has gone through. That'll give the funding for the next 13 months needed for the project. With UAMPS, the CFPP project, NuScale and Fluor have come to agreements on some of the terms of the contracts needed in going forward. Again, just making progress on the contractual side. The more exciting part is the task orders 3 and 4, which 3 is the cost estimate, 4 is the COLA work, which we start actual physical drilling at the site. And so here's some pictures they provided to us that they've improved the access road to the site. T11, I think, is what this road is referred to at the INL. And so they've made improvements there, continued some of the mowing activities for the boring. They've got temporary trailers installed with generators to support those facilities. The main activity that's going on is they're starting the drilling, and the drilling's going on as we speak, with 35 to 45 people on site supporting that drilling. And their target is to have that completed by the 23rd, just before Thanksgiving of next month. And then have it finished up in December, and then they're trying to beat the winter in Idaho. So I'm hoping they make it. My wife's from Idaho, so Thanksgiving can be pretty wintry up there. So hopefully things go as planned. And then there's some other work that they can do during the winter on the seismic surveys that are needed for the COLA. I think this is mostly a repeat. One thing here that is the NRC is planning on visiting the site and observing some of the drilling activities. Again, they're trying to really engage the NRC during the whole process. And so they're up to speed when they get different submittals. They know what's going on at the site. So in an effort to keep things moving forward. And last but not least is the subscription for the project. Grant County continues to move forward. They've had meetings with them. And Doug was hoping within the next month or so that they would have this development coordination agreement, which is equivalent to our power sales contract, the same payment obligations. He's hoping to have that by the end of next month. And then some other utilities here, Clark, Public Utilities, the due diligence is a lot of what Grant's been doing, where they exchange information with UAMPS under a non-disclosure agreement, so they have a better understanding of the project to be able to move forward. And then they're working with several other utilities, getting the letter of intent. So these that are shown here are kind of in order of how far along they are. I think Grant would be the first to come on board, then Clark, then the others. And I know Doug, when I've talked to him of UAMPS, is, his goal, and they're working diligently, to get significant additional subscription before the end of the year, and that would be fabulous for the project. So, any questions on any of that? And if not, that's pretty much what I have this month.
All right. Any questions, comments?
For me,
One comment for our next meeting is I believe we've decided we won't have a meeting in November due to the election. Will be the election night, and so our next meeting will be December. I'm not sure what that date is.
It is December the 7th.
December the 7th. So
Okay. All righty then. If we can have an adjournment, we'll see everybody December 7th.
So again, that meeting is next Wednesday at 4:30, right? The council.
correct, in the
Okay.
council chambers. It will be available by Zoom or through the city website. And I'll be there with the council personally, and then we'll have UFS Zoom in and make their presentation, kind of like they did last month with the power board.
Okay. I will go ahead and motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Okay, so Todd gave us the motion, Randy the second, Mark.
How's right?
Mr. Andy,
Palmer, aye.
Todd,
Spriggs, aye.
Randy,
Aye.
and Dinsmore, aye. Okay,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Rick.